Good evening. Welcome to tonight's Bible study, our men's group, Forged. We are discussing the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, a book written by John C. Maxwell. As we've said before, I believe this was one of his earlier books. This is kind of the book, I think, that shot him up into the limelight of leadership, where people started to recognize him. It's been around for some time. Are you aware of that?
I am, but speaking of shooting up, I feel like you're looking down on me.
Yeah, your stool's a little low.
Something's wrong with this. Put the short guy at the shortest seat. Excuse us, online.
So,
this is me elevating myself.
I'm just going to talk about today's law.
Okay. Oh, much better. Now I can see eye to eye with you. Okay.
And today's law is the law of empowerment.
Yes,
so
it is.
Do you feel more empowered,
I feel
John?
way more empowerment now that I can look you in the eye and not be like, hi, how are you doing,
That
Dad?
was not on purpose, John.
Okay.
So the law of, I actually intended for Ethan to sit there, so the joke's on you.
Yeah.
The law of empowerment is essentially the law that a leader cannot empower his or her leadership team if they do not feel, first, confident in their own ability.
Right, and so here it is. Here's why most leaders don't empower. They are very shaky and not stable in their own leadership skills. And you can even say that it's a pride problem where they just feel like they have to have a micromanagement style of control over everything. And if you read any part of the chapter today, I think it's the Henry Ford chapter.
Yes, correct.
Because most of that first part of that chapter is how Ford Motor Company would have been light years ahead of GM and probably even bought out GM in the early years if Henry Ford let his very qualified leadership team around him make some changes and innovations that were necessary. But there's one thing that we learn in history: leaders that do not empower those underneath them often struggle. I would say from history, on another stand, you'd go to Alexander the Great, who understood the law of empowerment. And one of the reasons why Alexander the Great was able to be such a formidable foe and conquer a lot of territory is, although he's from a small country of Macedonia, he was able to empower the leadership around him. So you weren't just fighting Alexander the Great. You were fighting a whole team of qualified, skilled laborers that he had empowered to do so.
Now, I like this chapter. I thought it was great information, and John C. Maxwell, I think, nailed this one.
Right.
What he failed to expound on, I think it was mentioned briefly, but what he failed to really get in depth on is the fact that you empower people under you, although that is needed for success.
Right.
You need to empower the right kind of people.
Right.
I think even recently, love Trump, hate Trump. Trump, now he obviously has a lot of his own issues of pride, but he did bring a lot of people into his circle that later stabbed him in the back. Mm-hmm. He also allowed a lot of bureaucrats to remain on high levels that also ended up being a big cause of his demise.
Right.
And so I'm not here to defend former President Trump and his leadership style. I'm just stating that he is a very recent illustration of someone in a very high level of position of authority. If you empower the wrong kind of people, or if you allow the wrong kind of people to stay empowered around you, it can actually lead to an early destruction.
Right.
And I think that is the concern for a lot of leaders. A lot of people are thinking, who is the right person? Can you really ever know someone? Can you be confident that if you've empowered someone to basically represent you? So as pastors, we are empowering people in the school, empowering staff in the church. When they represent the leadership team, do they do so in a way that would bring success or bring destruction? Do they do so in a way that reflects well on us as a team or poorly on us as a team? Right. And I think that is the dilemma that a lot of leaders who want to empower, so they get it. They understand that, pridefully trying to micromanage or keep all of the authority on their own shoulders, they know the company, the organization, the nonprofit, the church will only grow so much if they're only leading followers, which is essentially what's happening.
Right.
Instead of leading leaders, they're leading followers. And they know that if they only have followers, they can only go so far. But then in the back of the head, they have this concern that if I start leading leaders and these leaders start taking followers, where will these leaders take the followers?
Mm-hmm. And there's where paranoia sets in.
Yes, that's true.
Right? And this is where they go two routes. Either they understand that these leaders, and whether maybe they understand, like Maxwell would say, is the best way to keep your job is to empower others that can actually eclipse you so that they'll never let you go because they want you to do that to everybody, right? That's the true benefit of somebody who empowers people and does a great job at it. They're indispensable because anybody can come up the chain and actually become something valuable for the company going through that person. They'll never let you go. But the problem is most people won't do that, and instead they'll take the Henry Ford route of undermining and pitting people against each other to try to bring those under him demise so he has less competition.
Right. I agree with you, and you're right. Maxwell stated that pretty clearly. I think that the greatest key, personally, to success, this is not, I can't point out a verse directly that would state what I'm about to tell you, but I see principles of it, especially with Jesus Christ. And we're going to talk about Christ and his followers. I feel like that's the best illustration for empowerment. In fact, Mark chapter 6, Jesus sends out 2 by 2, and it says, and he gives them power. Like you can't get closer to empowering people than giving them power to cast out demons and do these amazing things. Okay. When it comes to empowering people, it's not enough just to empower leaders. My suggestion very strongly is if you're in any position of authority, to empower leaders who have the same vision as you already before you empower them, and who love you and trust you.
Right.
If they don't trust you, you can't and should not trust them. If they don't love you, you can't and should not trust them. Here is where I think former President Trump failed. He had a lot of guys and girls who were very strong leaders. Good or bad, they were strong leaders that surrounded him. But they didn't all love President Trump. They didn't all have the same vision as him.
Right.
But they were strong leaders.
Right.
Some of them had been leaders, political leaders, for decades, most of their life. And so Trump, I think foolishly, naively, believe it or not, assumed these are strong leaders. They've been doing this a long time. I'll trust them. But they didn't have Trump's vision. And they didn't love Trump.
Right.
So Trump gave power to people who disliked him and wanted to go a different direction. Well, what do you think is going to happen when you empower someone who comes onto the team already going a different direction and doesn't trust you?
And let me just, I'm sorry, Ethan, you will be able to get into it.
I'm actually, I'm listening because I'm trying to formulate what
let me bring another president into scope. Let's bring on President Lincoln, who was known for actually putting people on his cabinet that did not have the same political background or even, you can say, a lot of the same standpoint in some areas. But here's the one thing he made sure of. They all had the same vision of bringing the country together. They might have gotten there from different routes, but that was the main criteria for his cabinet. Do you want the country to be together? If so, and he was actually cornered by a reporter who says, why do you hire people that are your political enemies? He said, because even I should have to fight for something I believe in. And that's part of leadership, and that's why he was pretty successful, because he had different opinions in the room, but they all had the same vision, and there's the difference.
You are right about that, but if you look at President Lincoln's tenure as president, it was a lot of heartache and a lot of anxiety.
Hey,
those guys caused him no end of anxiety.
Yes, they did, but it made him a stronger leader because he had to fight for every single thing he was able to accomplish.
He sure did. Ethan, what are your thoughts? The law of empowerment as it comes to empowering the wrong kind of people versus the right kind of people.
I just think we have to be careful when we define the wrong kind of person, because if the wrong kind of person is someone that we don't think is ready, no one's ever going to be ready.
That's very true.
So if you're working, so your sense of ready can't, the right kind of person can't be, if they're ready for it. Well, no one's ever ready for life. My favorite phrase right now, it's very self-deprecating to a degree, but there's no experts out there. Everyone's just figuring it out, and the people who are more successful are the people who are figuring things out quicker. So, they're willing to fail faster. So there's that. But then the other side, too, is not only you can't define it by who's ready, but also you cannot define it by who thinks the same way, or even who has the same philosophy as me. So I like what you said, because I was interested to see where you're going with that. The main thing would be, do you have the same vision as me? Like you're saying, okay, is the same general the end goal? Is that are we in agreement upon that? Okay, so as long as we're in agreement upon that end goal, we don't have to think the same.
That is correct.
We can think very differently.
Yes.
But then obviously as a leader, you're also empowered to, as you're empowering people, to be okay, you're falling out of step with not just the vision but the values. So you're out. Right. But leaders have to be very, very okay with hiring people being around people, empowering people who do not only don't think the same as them, but disagree with them, because that is, I think that's one of the biggest catalysts for change and growth, is to be around people who think differently than you.
You're right. So having the same vision, having someone you've hired to work with you doesn't mean they're mimicking.
Right.
Doesn't mean they're yes men or yes women. That's not helpful. It just means, like John stated, they want the same goal.
Right.
The reason I think, guys, it's so important to empower people on your team that trust you and love you is because 1 Corinthians 13 tells us when you love someone, you don't envy them.
Right.
When you love someone, you think the best of them. 1 Corinthians tells us when you love someone, you suffer along with them.
Right.
These are all extremely good qualities to have in a leader. And if they love you, those qualities are more likely to play out with you, as opposed to if they don't love you, they'll be less patient with you, they will be envious of you, they will think evil of you, and they will probably do harm to you.
Right.
So you've empowered someone who doesn't love you, who won't have these qualities, 1 Corinthians 13 gives us, which will destroy you.
Right.
I am not saying, empower people who adore you and think that you're God's gift on earth. No, I'm saying empower people who you have a connection with. Now, on a spiritual leadership level, pastors, it's going to look different than if you work for a company. You're not going to only empower people that love you, but you should at least empower people in a secular position that there is a mutual trust and a mutual, at least, I care about that person. They care about me, although the love will not be as deep as it would be in a church setting.
Right.
But that is why I say both. Both a singular vision. The Bible says, how can two walk together lest they be agreed? A singular vision, but also a singular concern, compassion, care, love, whatever you want to call it, for each other, which I think displays itself best in mutual trust, not mutual respect. Because mutual respect, you can give someone respect you still sorely dislike. Outrightly hate, but you can respect them on the outside. That's not enough. There must be a mutual trust. My advice, guys, don't ever empower someone who doesn't trust you, or they will constantly undermine your decisions. And you will constantly, if you don't trust them, second-guess theirs. And you will just do each other harm. And you will walk away from each other someday having been worse off working together. If you trust each other, you're more likely to achieve that singular vision.
Right, and let's bring it into the realm of the home. So where I think a lot of marriages get into trouble is they never had the conversation early on of the same goals that they want to accomplish.
That is very, very true.
Or they get into a situation where maybe they were young when they determined, to fall in love, and they've developed as a person over time, and so now goals might be slightly different, and there has to be some kind of humility to be able to work together to come together with a unified goal. So see, what happens is, on this fundamental level, if we can't even have the same goal as our spouse, then eventually the whole home is going to be really in a problem, because can a house divided against itself stand? The answer is obviously no. And so that's where we have to be really, really flexible in a way, but also prayerfully have wisdom and discretion as to make sure us and our wives are on the same exact goal, major goals for sure, even secondary goals, especially for our children, need to be the same. Because we've all been in situations where mom wants one thing for a child, dad wants another thing for a child, and who's getting torn apart?
Yeah, the children.
The child.
Right.
And that's just very damaging.
Yeah. Ethan, what are your thoughts on that?
I was kind of thinking a different route. And
Go ahead, give us a different route.
But just the kind of the nitty-gritty of what empowerment looks like. I love that there's a term that the military uses for a lot of their special operations teams, and it's oh my goodness, I just lost it. It's basically they spread out the authority. So within groups, you have the chain of command, but then each individual operator has their own, like, they have the discretion.
Expertise.
Right. Well, not just expertise, but they have the authority to make a final call and kind of eat the consequences, so to speak. And so I love that, because a lot, whether or not you like what they do or how they get it done, these guys get a lot done. They operate at a very high level in very stressful situations. And so my thinking is, okay, I like that. How can that be applied to everyday life, to civilian life? How can we apply that to our homes, to our friendships? And so the goal now as a parent, at least for me, is, okay, as my two sons, and maybe if you have one or two more kids, that'd be great. But as my two sons grow older, how do I instill this sense of, hey, like there's a sense of authority in your life, because the insecure leader is not going to delegate.
No.
The
The insecure leader
trust.
micromanages. The insecure leader
Right.
does not empower. The insecure leader doesn't delegate.
Right.
The insecure leader, as was stated in this chapter, tears down the very
Right.
leadership they built up
Right.
once it becomes a bigger beast than they originally intended.
Right.
And so then it becomes, again, just kind of circling back full circle. It then becomes the leadership in the home. The parents, the father. It becomes their responsibility to, from a young age, start building their children up so that they become functioning adults while they're older, when they become older.
Right.
So.
Okay.
That's
If
that's
the
what I thought
insecure
about.
leader does not empower, then one of the basic questions we haven't asked yet or answered yet is, how do we eliminate that insecurity? If we're telling you, John C. Maxwell states, I would totally agree, in my experience, that those leaders who struggle with insecurity are not strong leaders, how can they impart strength they do not have, and why would they want to impart strength on others? Believing themselves to lack it, they'll think that they'll take their job. So how do we eliminate our insecurities as leaders so that we can empower those in our family, our spouse, our friends, that we can empower those in our workplace if you are in a job that allows you to hire? How do you eliminate your insecurities?
I think a lot of it starts with a mindset, and then from there it just spills out into your decision making. So the mindset, at least to me, of the parent, as a parent, is obviously we have our goal of we do everything we do is for the glory of God, but and in addition to that, okay, so then for my kids, how do I share that with them? It just kind of goes into, my goal for my kids is for them to be even more successful than I am. I would love that. I want that for them.
Because you love them.
Right.
But we're not still dealing with the question of insecurity. John, what do you think? I got some thoughts, but I'm curious about yours. How do we eliminate our insecurities? Ethan's kind of going down the route of, because I love people, I can empower them. But if you're insecure, that's really hard to do in the workplace.
Right. Well, in the workplace, for sure. So I think the way you get rid of insecurities is you are sure about what your vision and purpose is to begin with. I think a lot of people are insecure because their foundation of security was never solidified. And so they don't know what they want. So how are they going to empower the people to do something they have no idea what it is? And this shifting vision that was so popular in the corporate world for a long time finally was thrown out the window in many ways, and said, no, we all have to get together behind a mission statement. We need to publish it. We need to put it on our website. And we need to just make sure that the first thing people can see is, what do we stand for and what are we trying to accomplish? Because having leadership in even a Fortune 500 company that had different goals and different philosophies of vision, that was really hurting the company. And they had to bring it out to what is our main focus and goal. So that's one of the first ways I think you can start to be secure in your leadership and have security.
That is great. Having a vision and moving towards it. If everything else fails in your life, you at least see, I'm moving towards that vision. That itself will give you security.
Right.
I would highly encourage you to recognize this. Pride will always tell you lies.
Yep.
Pride will always tell you one of two things. You are better and you have false security, or you're not good enough, because pride will say, oh, I could always do better, and pride will mess with you and deceive you, and you will say, I'm never good enough, and you'll always be insecure. And it's ironic that pride could be the very cause of an insecurity. It doesn't make sense, but it can be. When you eliminate pride and humble yourself, you can see clearly, not through the deception pride keeps throwing at you, but through reality, you can see yourself clearly.
Right.
So my suggestion is, if you're struggling with insecurity, is to humble yourself, which doesn't make sense.
Right.
Because the world thinks if you struggle with insecurity, keep stepping on top of people and keep climbing over them and destroying their lives so you can have a better one and be secure in your own ability to, walk on people. But that's not what the Word of God says.
Nope.
So the Word of God says, if you lift yourself up, God will bring you down. And let me tell you, the more God brings you down, the more you're going to feel it, the more insecure you're going to be.
Right.
But the Bible then goes on to say, if you bring yourself low, God will lift you up. And when God lifts you up, that's when you find true security.
Right.
Spiritual security, emotional security,
Right.
which will then play out in your features, your ability to have a conversation without twitching, and your ability to talk to someone and look them in the eye and not wander off because their stare is harder than your stare, right? Because your security is in the fact that God is lifting me up.
Right.
Even in the secular workplace, you don't have to be all preachy about it in the secular workplace and say, well, I'm a Christian, God placed me here, whatever. No one needs to know that verbally from you. It will be played out because you will know God is with you. Why?
Right.
Because you are with God. And you've lowered yourself, and in whatever position you're in, wherever that's at, with whatever company it is, you will know God is lifting me up. And let me tell you guys, there is no stronger security you can attain this side of heaven than God lifting you up.
Right.
So I love what John said. You're right, John. You want to eliminate insecurities? Know where you're going. Head that direction. You'll gain confidence as you gain traction. But I'm going to challenge you to eliminate your pride, and your insecurities will also be eliminated.
Mm-hmm.
Ethan?
I think to add to that, I think just kind of make what I was trying to say make more like sense is you have to know your job. And that's really it. Like if you know, well, right. Well, not just purpose, but what is, so you kind of have to know your job description per se as a parent. And it's more than just make sure they have food and clothes and roof over their head. It's a lot more than that. Ephesians landed it up pretty well. Like train up a child in the way he should go.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is your job. So what is the way he should go? Well, then that's when it develops into your philosophy of parenting and how you succeed there. But you have to know what your job description is. If your goal is only to make sure your kid gets through high school, if that's what you see as your job, make sure your kid gets out of the house, then you're going to have a kid who's kind of dead weight by the time, unless, by the grace of God, something else happens when he graduates high school. So you have to know what your job is. And then from there, you have to exercise humility and figure out, okay, how does this play into our role, our family creed and all that sort of stuff. So.
Yeah. Well, on Ethan's note, by the way, you want to cause an employee in your workplace under you to be insecure. Don't give them a job description. Change their job description, or discipline them when they do their job description. You will destroy their security. You will constantly cause them to wonder, who am I and what am I doing here? Like, they will be scared to move in any direction.
Right.
I'm not telling you that so you'll do it. I'm telling you that so if you are doing that, that's what you're doing. You are not empowering them. You are destroying their security. And let me point this out. If you have someone over you doing that to you, they are setting you up for failure.
Right. And in the home, same thing. If you, speak harshly to your wife or your children because they're doing exactly what you told them to do, that's a problem.
Yep.
And, it's going to be a bigger problem as they mature in their own self-evaluation and their own image. And not in a bad way, but they're growing up, that when you tell your teenager, why did you do that? And they're like, because you told me to. And you're all over them, and that damages things. But this goes back to what Ethan's thought was. We often look at that verse, train up a child in the way he should go, and we often mess it up because we're always training up a child in the way he should be. We're so focused on the here and now that we don't ever look down the road and say, what are the things that I'm going to actually instill into our children that will help them be successful in the way they should go, future, not just how they should be.
Yep.
And that right there is one of the greatest desires of a parent. What am I doing today to help my son or my daughter actually be prepared for life, not just for bedtime?
Yeah. When I have 5 kids, oldest is 13, youngest is 3. When I discipline them, I keep telling people, because I just actually had my 3-year-old the other day. Something happened. I had him stand against the wall.
Right.
He's 3.5, and someone said, "Wow, Russ, how do you do that?" Because he's so cute. He's only 3.5. And I said, I think about Drake as 13.5, not 3.5. Right. And that's what I've been doing for all my kids. When they're young, I think of them. What will they be when they're teenagers? And that drives me to train them up in the way they should be as teenagers and as adults, not what I want now. Exactly what you said.
Right. So there we go with making sure we delegate the right way. But to Jesus, who is the best leader. And Russ is going to bring out, send them out 2 by 2 and empowering. And so, I guess we could segue to that.
Mark chapter 6, verse 5. And he could there do no mighty works, save that he laid his hands upon a few sick folk and healed them. And he marveled because of their unbelief, and he went round about the villages teaching. And he called unto him the 12, and began to send them forth by 2 and 2, and gave them power over unclean spirits, and commanded them that they should take nothing for their journey. All right. So he, first of all, paired them up with someone. So they had accountability, yes, but I think, paired them up with someone to instill courage and encouragement, and just had someone to talk with. He did not send them out on their own. Another great way to instill security. If you want to take away the security of someone, isolate them. So I already gave you one, and that's change their job description. Don't give them a job description or discipline them when they follow the job description. That's one way to destroy the security of the best men and women in your team. The second one is isolate them. You do those two things, I don't care how great of a leader they are. If they stay, they will be destroyed. If they're a good leader, they'll figure out and say, I'm not staying here, and they'll leave you. But those who really need money, those who don't see what you're doing, they will stay. They'll be destroyed. If you are in a company that's isolating you, changing your job description, disciplining you in your job description, it will destroy you. You're not strong enough to withstand that long term. Jesus does the opposite of that.
Absolutely.
He gives them a clear job description. He says, this is what I want from you. Another passage actually says, throughout this, he says, if you go there. Sorry, in this passage, says, if you show up, and this is their response, do this. Like, he gives them clear steps to, here's the problem, here's the solution. Here's the problem, here's the solution. Here's what you do, and this happens. So he gives a clear job description, and then he does not isolate them. He gives them a partner.
Right.
These guys accomplish amazing things. We're told they come back, and they report back to Jesus. They are full of joy. Mm-hmm. They are full of excitement and energy. And by the way, did you catch it in verses 5 and 6? They were sent out at a very difficult time and a difficult area.
Right.
The people were rejecting Jesus himself.
Right.
So it's not like he was sending them out to people begging for you to come listen, right? These people were already rejecting Jesus, and he says, now you go out and do it. But I'm not going to isolate you, and I'm going to be clear on your job description. And there's a clear vision. They attained it, came back, and they had been empowered. He says he gave them power to overcome unclean spirits.
Right, and he sent the disciples out 2 by 2. But guys, does God empower us and send us out with a helper, a comforter? Who is that? The Holy Spirit. And we always have that person to come alongside with us. And that's why I'd like to look at Jesus' prayer in John chapter 17, because here we have Jesus, the leader, who knows he's about to go to the cross, knows that the end is near, knows that in just, a month or so, he is going to be going up to glory, and these disciples are going to have to take the mission forward. And in John chapter 17, it's known as what I would call the Lord's Prayer, because it is the Lord's Prayer for not just his followers, but also for us. He really empowers them to his heavenly Father. And one of the most important things I see here is a spiritual leader wants to empower their followers or their leaders they're training relationship with God. What is the number one thing Jesus is saying to the Father? Father, you told me the words that I should tell them. I told them those words. And now I want them to be one with you like we're one. And now that's deep because they are actually one. But God's prayer for us and empowering us was that we would be one with the Father. And that is his prayer. And we talk about heavy duty empowering. And as thou hast sent me into the world, even so, verse 18, have I also sent them into the world. And for their sakes I sanctify myself, that they also might be sanctified through the truth. And I mean, you look at the first, starting verse 6 all the way through verse 18 and 19, you see this handing over of power to the disciples so that they are prepared to take the next level. Now, here's the really tough part. This prayer is prayed knowing, being God, that every single one of the disciples, save one, would desert him majorly. They would run the other way when the crowd came. They were going to forsake him. John was going to be one that kind of tailed, followed far off. He was thinking of Peter, who he knew would deny him. Yet he still went on to empower them. That's another lesson right there. That you can't empower people and think they're never going to fail, they're never going to mess up. It's, I'm going to empower them, and they're just going to have to learn some lessons. But I'll be there to help them.
Ethan, any final thoughts on the chapter?
Yeah, twofold. One, Jesus, to kind of encourage the men in this room, myself, to empower people. Jesus laid the groundwork for the church, but he left all the politics of it and all the setup to a group of country bumpkins and a couple city officials, sure, but like country bumpkins, like literally fishermen. They had like no degrees. They're like fishing for a living, okay? And he thought it was a good idea. And it said of those men that God used those men to turn the world upside down. Mm-hmm. Hence, here we are today, meeting in a church 2,000 years after the fact, right? So it's okay to empower people. And then the second thought is, and I remember that word I was trying to remember earlier, decentralized authority. that is 100% what Jesus did. Decentralized authority. By the time when he sends them out, like you're reading, he says, "Hey, you have the power to do this. You don't have to like ask the Father. You just do it, man. Just go do it." And I just think, kind of as a final thought, if you want to be, here's how I heard it put: a good leader delegates responsibilities and tasks. A great leader delegates trust and authority. So if you really want to take that next step, that next level of actually really empowering people to do something meaningful in their life, don't just tell them, "Hey, you get to do these, this, that, the other." Give them a list. No, you don't just laundry list them. No, you give them, you give them authority to affect change, and you can take a step back, and it's okay, because that's exactly what Jesus did. Obviously, he spent time trusting them, training them, empowering them, but the true empowerment was when he stepped away and said, "Go." So, yeah.
Right.
I'd like to end with this. Part of your responsibility as a leader is to lead leaders. Otherwise, you are just a lord over a castle of followers, and you're setting yourself up for failure and for limited growth. So if you're leading leaders, then you're also now required to train those leaders. My caution to you is, don't micromanage. You must empower, but do not empower above the person's ability to withstand it. You need to have the wisdom and discretion to empower upon that individual the level they can handle. Because if you over-empower them, you're giving them so much rope, they're going to hang themselves with it. Now, how does that look? That's going to look different for every person in every job site with every other leader, right? So there's no one size fits all. You just need to pray for wisdom. God, give me the wisdom to not over-empower, to empower enough so that this person can get a sense of what it looks like to have authority and be successful in it, or if they fail in it, not fail so hard they can't come back from their failure. Because there are some failures you can't come back from. So don't empower them so much that their failure is destructive. Right. Don't empower them so little that they don't know what it looks like. And there's a balance there, and it's hard to reach that balance, and that's on you as the leader. So my final encouragement is pray for wisdom. To know what that balance looks like so you don't cause the destruction of the very leaders you're trying to raise, nor cause the discouragement because you never empower them enough.
Right.
And the more they gain traction, the more they move forward, the more security they have, the more empowerment you can give them. Mm-hmm. And now you have duplicated strong leadership skills in someone who will do the same for the next generation. Mm-hmm. Thank you for joining us tonight. We will not be here next Sunday night. A lot of our pastoral staff will be on a marriage retreat. So we'll take a break for one another week and then come back that second Sunday in September. We hope to see you then. Thank you.